The noon sun burned over Fort Bowie, turning the dust into gold and the air into glass. Wagons creaked in the distance as Clara Hensley stepped down from the stagecoach, clutching her worn carpetbag with trembling hands. She'd come 1,000 miles from Kansas with nothing but a locket, a letter of promise, and a name, Taza, an Apache peacekeeper said to be strong, honorable, and searching for a wife through the government's new shelter bride program. Her palms were sweaty. Her dress, though carefully pressed that morning, already looked wrinkled and travel-stained. And her heart, her heart felt like a trapped bird. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't the bride the Apache man had been promised. Name? Barked the officer at the outpost desk, squinting under the brim of his hat. Clara Hensley, sir, she replied softly. He shuffled through papers, frowned, and muttered, "You're not the woman in the photograph." Clara's cheeks burned. She knew what that meant. The woman they expected, the one Taza had chosen, was her younger sister, Evelyn. Fair-haired, green-eyed, with a smile that melted men's hearts. But Evelyn had vanished weeks before the journey west, running off with a cavalry soldier. Rather than let her family's name be dragged through scandal, Clara had taken her place. The officer sighed. "You'd best wait in the shade, ma'am. This'll cause a stir." As he walked off, Clara sat on an old crate near the fort's gate, watching dust devils dance across the dry plain. In the distance, a group of Apache riders approached, silent as ghosts, their long hair glinting in the sun. One rode ahead of the rest, his horse black as midnight. The moment he dismounted, every soldier straightened. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his copper skin marked by sun and wind. His dark eyes seemed to take in everything, the rifles, the nervous glances, and finally her. Clara rose quickly, heart pounding. "Mr. Taza?" He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. His voice was calm, deep as a canyon. "You came far, white woman." "Yes," she stammered. "But there's been a mistake. I'm not—" "You are the bride sent to me," he interrupted gently. She blinked. "The one in the photograph, she didn't come." Taza's expression didn't change. "Then you are the one who came." The simplicity of his words struck her harder than any insult could have. No anger, no disappointment, only acceptance. Yet she couldn't meet his gaze. She knew what others saw when they looked at her. Plain brown hair, a face too serious, eyes too dull. She'd never been anyone's first choice. An officer cleared his throat and began reading the marriage agreement aloud, his voice flat and official. Clara barely heard it. She only felt the weight of the sun, the silence of the Apaches watching, and the strange steadiness of Taza beside her. When it was time to mark her name, her hand shook so badly she could hardly write. Taza reached out, steadying her wrist with a touch that was both firm and gentle. "It is done," he said when the paper was signed. Afterward, the soldiers gathered awkwardly, offering forced congratulations. The Apache riders murmured among themselves. And Clara, newly a wife yet feeling utterly alone, stood staring at her boots. As the sun began to dip, Taza led his horse closer and gestured for her to mount behind him. "We go to my people now," he said. She hesitated. You don't mind that I'm not—" Taza turned in the saddle, meeting her uncertain eyes. His mouth curved into the faintest smile. "You are not the pretty one they showed me," he said quietly. "But perhaps you are the one I needed." Something inside her trembled, half fear, half wonder. She took his offered hand and climbed onto the horse. The warmth of his back, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and the wind tugging her hair filled the space between them. As they rode toward the crimson horizon, leaving behind the fort, the soldiers, and her old life, Clara felt the strangest flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, being the wrong bride was exactly what fate had planned all along. The trail wound through the red rock desert like a ribbon of dust, stretching toward a horizon that shimmered with heat. Clara clung to Taza's back, her hands gripping the rough leather of his belt as they rode deeper into Apache country. Every bump of the horse's stride reminded her that she didn't belong here. She'd been a schoolteacher once in a quiet Kansas town where her biggest fear was a thunderstorm or a broken fence. Now she was the wife of a man she'd met only hours ago, a man whose people had every reason to mistrust hers. By the time the sun sank behind the mountains, they reached a wide valley lit by the orange glow of campfires. The Apache camp came alive with low drums and murmurs in a language she didn't understand. Children darted between the lodges laughing, but when they saw her, a pale stranger in a faded calico dress, the laughter died. The women stopped grinding corn. The men stiffened. Taza dismounted first, then helped her down. His people watched in silence as he said something in Apache, his voice calm and commanding. The tension in the air softened slightly, though the stares did not. Clara lowered her head, wishing she could vanish into the dust. A woman stepped forward, older, with hair streaked in silver and eyes sharp as flint. She said something in a questioning tone. Taza replied briefly, then turned to Clara. "This is Nietzsche's mother, the one who will teach you our ways. She says you must eat." "I'm not hungry," Clara whispered, though her stomach had been empty since dawn. He gave her a long look. "You must eat. You are my wife now. They watch to see if you are strong." The words hit her harder than he likely intended. "You are my wife now." It sounded so final, so binding. But was it real? To her, this marriage felt like a misunderstanding. To him, it was something sacred, a promise sealed not by attraction or beauty, but by duty and respect. She followed him into a small wickiup made of brush and hides. Inside, it smelled of earth and smoke. Taza handed her a bowl of stew. Rabbit, she thought, and sat opposite her, eating with quiet dignity. Clara tried to mimic him, though her hands shook. Why did you not send me away?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. He looked up. "Send you where?" "Back to the fort. I wasn't the one you were promised." Taza's gaze lingered on her face as though weighing something unspoken. The wind changes its path. So does fate. A man who fights the wind loses. She lowered her eyes, unsure whether it was wisdom or kindness or both. After the meal, Taza spread a thick woven blanket on the ground. He gestured toward it. "You will sleep here." Her breath caught. "And you?" He nodded toward the fire pit near the entrance. "There, I will keep the fire." Clara hesitated. "You don't want—" Taza raised a hand gently. "You are not a woman I take. You are a woman I learn." The simple truth of his tone left her speechless. He wasn't impatient or demanding like the men she'd known before. He spoke as if this marriage was a bridge, not a chain. When the night deepened, she lay awake beneath the blanket, listening to the rhythmic crackle of the fire. Taza sat cross-legged by the entrance, his profile outlined in flickering light. He seemed carved from the land itself, steady, unyielding, yet somehow kind. Outside, a coyote howled. Somewhere in the camp, a drum beat softly, echoing like a distant heart. Clara touched the locket at her neck, feeling the hidden photo inside, the picture of her sister, the one Taza had been meant to marry. Shame pricked her eyes with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the dark, though she knew he couldn't hear her. But perhaps he did. For a moment later, she saw him glance over his shoulder and murmur something in Apache, something soft and low that she didn't understand. Yet his tone soothed her trembling heart. By dawn, when she woke to the sound of horses and laughter, Taza was already gone, leaving a small piece of fruit and a cup of water by her side. She smiled faintly through her exhaustion. No man had ever treated her with such care. Maybe she wasn't the bride he ordered, but somehow she was the one he had chosen. The morning sun spilled over the valley, gilding the hills and tents in pale light. The Apache camp stirred to life, smoke rising from cooking fires, women grinding corn, children chasing each other barefoot through the dust. Clara stood at the edge of it all, clutching a woven basket Nietzsche's mother had given her, trying to remember what each task meant. Every movement, every word in this world was new. She bent down to pick up corn kernels, fumbling, dropping half of them. The older women snickered softly behind her back. Clara didn't need to understand their words. The laughter stung all the same. Her pale dress, her awkwardness, her foreignness, it all marked her as other. When she accidentally spilled a bowl of ground maize, one of the younger women muttered something sharp. Clara froze, the blood rushing to her cheeks. Before she could stammer an apology, Taza appeared beside her. He said something calm but firm in Apache, and the woman instantly looked down, chastened. Then, turning to Clara, he crouched to help her pick up the kernels, his movements quiet and deliberate. "They do not mean harm," he said softly. "They think you will not stay." Clara looked at him in surprise. "Why would they think that?" He paused. "Because many who come from your world leave when the land grows rough." Her lips parted in a nervous laugh. "Then they might be right about me." Taza smiled slightly, the kind of smile that made the world tilt a little. "You do not seem one who runs. She didn't know how to answer. Maybe she wasn't a runner, but she was a woman full of fear, hiding from her own secret. And yet, standing beside him, she felt steadier than she had in years. Over the next few days, Taza began teaching her the rhythms of his world. He showed her how to braid corn into ropes, how to shape bread from ground mesquite, how to listen to the cry of an eagle to know if rain was coming. He didn't mock her clumsiness. He only watched, patient as she learned. At night, they shared quiet suppers near the fire. Sometimes he spoke of his people's ways, how the stars guided warriors, how every creature carried a spirit, how silence spoke truer than most words. Clara listened, spellbound. Once, while watching him carve a small figure from wood, she asked, "Do your people believe in love?" He glanced up, knife glinting in the firelight. "Love? Yes," she said softly. "In my world, people marry for it. At least they say they do." Taza's eyes softened. "Love is not a word we speak much, but we show it. In staying, in protecting, in sharing the fire when the cold comes." His voice was steady, but something in it stirred her deeply, a truth that felt far older than her own understanding. Still, not everyone shared Taza's acceptance. Traders from the fort came one evening bringing supplies. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a sneer, looked Clara over and said loud enough for all to hear, "Didn't think the Apache had to settle for scraps." The laughter that followed was short-lived. Taza moved so fast no one saw him draw his knife. It flashed just once, slicing a thin line through the air. The trader stumbled back, eyes wide. Taza spoke low and fierce. "You will not speak that way of my wife." No one dared laugh again. That night, when they were alone, Clara's voice trembled. "You didn't have to defend me." "Yes," he said simply. "I did." She turned away, blinking back tears. "You could have had someone beautiful, someone from your own world." He studied her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Beauty is a river that dries. Strength is the mountain that stays." The words sank deep into her heart. For the first time, she began to wonder if this strange, quiet man saw something in her no one else ever had. Days later, when she walked through the camp, the women no longer laughed. Some even nodded in greeting. The children followed her, curious but unafraid. For the first time since she left Kansas, Clara realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to belong. Night in the Apache Valley was unlike anything Clara had known back in Kansas. The stars were closer here, the silence deeper, filled with soft wind and the distant cries of coyotes. The campfire outside their wickiup had burned low, glowing like a single red heart against the darkness. Clara sat near it, her hands wrapped around a cup of hot tea made from desert herbs. The others had gone to sleep, but she couldn't. Her thoughts churned like restless wind, guilt, fear, longing, all circling the same truth she carried inside her like a thorn. She wasn't the woman Taza was supposed to marry. Each night, the secret grew heavier. Taza treated her with quiet kindness, with patience, with a dignity she felt she didn't deserve. When he spoke to her, it was with respect. When he looked at her, it wasn't pity she saw, it was understanding. But how could she tell him that his bride was nothing but a lie she'd built from shame? She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out the small silver locket she always kept close. The hinges creaked as she opened it, revealing the faded photograph of her sister Evelyn, the true bride. Evelyn's face smiled back, perfect as ever, framed in curls, eyes bright and alive. Clara traced the photo with her thumb. "You should have been here," she whispered. "You were the one he wanted, not me." The night breeze rustled the hide flap behind her. She turned quickly, startled. Taza stood in the doorway, tall and still, his eyes reflecting the dim firelight. "You do not sleep," he said quietly. Clara clutched the locket, startled. I was just thinking." He stepped closer, his voice low and calm. "Your heart is heavy. I can feel it when you walk." She smiled faintly, trying to hide her trembling. "You feel too much, Taza." He sat across from her, the fire's glow softening his strong features. "You speak with ghosts," he said after a long pause. "Every night." Her throat tightened. "Maybe I do." For a long while, neither of them spoke. The wind carried the faint smell of sage and smoke between them. Finally, she asked, almost in a whisper, "Why did you not ask for the other woman? The one in the picture?" Taza's brow furrowed slightly. She did not come. You did, but Clara began, then stopped. Words tangled in her mouth. He looked at her, calm and unwavering. Do you think I cannot see truth? You are not her, her breath caught. The world seemed to tilt beneath her. You knew? He nodded slowly. I saw when you first stepped from the wagon. Your eyes are not the same as the pictures, but eyes tell more than faces. Tears welled before she could stop them. Then why didn't you say anything? Because you came, he said simply. You crossed the dry lands, left your world, and still stood before me. That is a kind of courage my people honor. Clara's lips trembled. But you must think me a liar. No, he said, shaking his head. You are a woman hiding pain. That is not the same, his words undid her. She covered her face with her hands, tears spilling through her fingers. I only wanted to protect my sister. She couldn't face this life. She was afraid. And you were not? I was terrified, she whispered. Taza's voice softened. Yet you came. He reached across the firelight, his fingers brushing the edge of her hand, a gesture more powerful than any embrace. His touch was warm, grounding, real. I do not need the woman from the picture, he said quietly. I need the one who does not run from fire. Clara looked up at him through her tears. The weight of her secret didn't vanish, it still lived inside her. But something shifted. For the first time, it wasn't shame that filled her chest. It was relief. When Taza stood to leave, he paused at the door. Sleep, Clara. Tomorrow the women will teach you to weave. Your hands must learn peace. As he disappeared into the night, she pressed the locket shut and tucked it away. The photo inside no longer felt like a reminder of her failure. It was a symbol of the choice she'd made. And though the fire burned low, its glow touched her face softly, as if the desert itself whispered what she dared not believe. Maybe she wasn't the wrong bride after all. The wind came first, hot and restless, carrying the smell of rain that never seemed to fall. By afternoon, the sky had turned the color of tarnished silver. The elders of the camp looked up often, speaking in low tones. Even Taza, who was rarely rattled by nature's moods, seemed wary. Clara was helping Naicha's mother weave reeds into baskets when the first rumble of thunder rolled across the valley. The older woman stopped mid-braid, her sharp eyes flicking toward the dark horizon. Chi, she said softly. Storm. Within minutes, the camp came alive with motion. Men secured horses and tied down hides. Women gathered children and covered food stores. Clara followed their lead, though she felt out of rhythm, unsure which way to turn. Lightning clawed across the clouds like bright fingers. Taza, she called, searching for him among the riders. He was already mounting his horse, his hair whipping in the wind. The fire will come, he shouted above the rising gust. It always follows the dry thunder. Before she could ask what he meant, the air cracked. Then the scent of burning mesquite filled her nose. Smoke rose from the ridge above the camp. Flames. The Apache men rode toward it immediately, their silhouettes swallowed by the haze. Clara stayed behind with the women and elders, helping to move belongings toward the riverbank where the earth was damp. The children cried as the air thickened with smoke. When a gust blew sparks toward the lodges, one of the smaller shelters caught flame. Screams broke out. An old woman was still inside. Clara didn't think. She dropped the baskets she carried and ran. Clara, Naicha's mother, shouted, but the wind carried her name away. The heat hit her first. The thatched roof was already blazing when she reached the hut. Clara covered her mouth with her shawl and ducked inside. The air burned her lungs. The old woman lay on the ground, coughing weakly, her gray hair tangled in the smoke. Hold on, Clara gasped, lifting her under the arms. The woman was frail, light as a bird, but Clara's legs felt like lead. The flames roared above her as she dragged them both toward the door. When she stumbled out into the open, strong hands seized her shoulders. Clara! Taza's voice cut through the chaos. He lifted the old woman from her arms and carried her toward safety. Clara followed, stumbling, half-blind from smoke. When they reached the river's edge, Taza set the woman down and turned to Clara. Her face was streaked with soot, her hair wild and singed at the ends. He pressed his hand to her cheek. You could have died, he said, his voice trembling beneath the calm. She would have burned, Clara managed, coughing. Taza looked at her a long moment, then something in his expression softened. He leaned closer until their foreheads almost touched. Now they will see what I already saw, he whispered. Behind them, the storm finally broke. Rain fell in heavy sheets, dousing the last of the fire. The Apache people gathered near the river, weary but alive. Nietzsche's mother approached, her lined face solemn, her eyes searching Clara's soot-blackened face. Then, without a word, she reached out and touched Clara's shoulder, a gesture of quiet respect. Clara blinked, startled. It was the first time any of them had touched her in kindness. Later that night, when the fires were rebuilt and calm returned to the camp, Taza sat beside her outside their wickiup. The rain had cooled the earth and the air smelled sweet again. "You were not afraid," he said, breaking the silence. "I was," she admitted softly, "but there wasn't time to think about it." He nodded slowly. "That is what courage is, doing what fear says you cannot." For the first time, she let herself smile through her exhaustion. The firelight danced across his face, and in that golden glow, he looked not just like her husband by treaty, but the man she'd begun to trust with her heart. As they sat together beneath the stars, Clara realized that something had changed, not just in the way the others saw her, but in how she saw herself. She was no longer the woman who had come west by mistake. She was his wife, and for the first time she was proud of it. Weeks passed after the fire, and the valley slowly returned to peace. Smoke no longer darkened the horizon, and laughter drifted through the camp again. Clara was no longer treated as an outsider. The women invited her to grind corn, the children ran to her with flowers, and Nietzsche's mother, once skeptical, now smiled when Clara entered her tent. Yet deep down, Clara knew her place between the Apache and the white world was fragile. She was caught like a leaf between two winds, torn by duty to one and drawn by love to the other. One afternoon, she was washing clothes by the river when she saw riders approaching in the distance, blue coats glinting under the sun. Soldiers. Her blood ran cold. The men rode straight toward the camp, rifles slung, dust rising behind their horses. Clara's heart thudded as she recognized one of them, Lieutenant Reed, the officer who'd overseen her arrival months before. He dismounted first, his expression hard. "Taza," Reed said curtly, "we need to speak." Taza stepped forward, calm but wary. "Your words can be said in front of my wife." Reed's eyes flicked toward Clara, then narrowed. "Wife, that's what you're calling this now?" He turned to her. "Mrs. Hensley, do you realize you're living outside the fort's protection? The Army has reason to believe these people are preparing for raids. You need to come with us." Clara stiffened. "That's not true. These people have done nothing but survive." Reed ignored her protest, his gaze cold. "You don't belong here. You're a citizen of the United States, not a member of an Apache tribe." Taza's jaw tightened. "She belongs where her heart stays." Reed gave a dry laugh. "Her heart doesn't decide the law. The Shelter Bride Agreement is invalid. The woman sent to you," he paused, his words turning sharp, "was not her, was she?" Clara froze. The blood drained from her face. The secret she thought had settled peacefully between her and Taza now hung in the air like a loaded gun. "Lieutenant," she began quietly, "please." Reed cut her off. "You're not the woman assigned to this peace marriage. You lied to the U.S. government and you're living among hostiles under false terms." The surrounding Apache men shifted, their eyes narrowing. Taza stepped forward, placing himself between Clara and Reed. "My wife spoke truth to me," he said evenly. "She stays by her will, not by any man's paper." Reed's voice hardened. "If you don't release her, Taza, the fort will consider this a breach of the treaty." Taza's expression darkened. "You would start war for one woman?" Reed's hand brushed the hilt of his pistol. "If I must." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The wind carried the tension like the hum of a drawn bow. Then Clara stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "Stop this," she pleaded. "Please, he didn't deceive anyone. I did. I came in my sister's place because she was too frightened. I thought it was the right thing. Punish me if you must, but don't hurt them." Reed's expression flickered. Momentary pity, then scorn. "You don't know what you're saying. They'll never truly accept you." Clara glanced at Taza. "They already have." Taza turned to her then, his eyes steady, calm as ever. "You must go," he said quietly. Her heart lurched. "No, I won't. If you stay," he said, his voice thick with restraint, "blood will spill. I will not let war come for you." She shook her head, tears spilling freely. "You can't just send me away." He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheek. "The fire taught me what you are. Strong flame not meant to be smothered. But if you burn here, my people burn too." Reed gave a sharp nod to his men. Pack her things. As the soldiers moved, Clara's knees felt weak. The world blurred. Taza's hand remained on her face until the last moment, then fell away. I will find you again, he murmured in Apache. In the wind. In the dawn. They led her away, her tears mixing with the dust. She didn't look back until they reached the ridge, and when she did, Taza was still standing there, tall, unmoving, his figure framed by the dying sun. That was the moment Clara knew what her heart had become. A rope stretched between two worlds, tied to both, belonging fully to neither. The army escorted Clara back to Fort Stanton under a blazing New Mexico sun. The ride felt endless, dust, silence, and the bitter ache of loss with every mile that separated her from Taza. The soldiers around her were quiet too, uncomfortable in the presence of a woman who had loved the enemy. When they finally reached the fort, the whitewashed walls and fluttering flag looked nothing like home. They looked like a cage. Lieutenant Reed dismounted first. You'll be kept here until a decision is made, he told her curtly. The army will need to review your case. You may be charged for fraud and unlawful desertion. Clara barely heard him. Her eyes were fixed on the mountains rising far to the west, the same peaks that guarded Taza's camp. She imagined him there, perhaps standing by the fire, perhaps still watching the horizon for her. She was taken to a small cabin at the edge of the fort. A cot, a chair, and a small window were all it offered. The soldiers posted a guard outside, but no one spoke to her for hours. When night came, she lay awake, listening to the coyotes and the far-off whisper of wind. And for the first time in her life, she prayed, not to the God of the white settlers, but to the spirit Taza had told her about, the one that carried voices through the wind. Let him know I didn't leave by choice, she whispered into the darkness. Let him know I still belong to him. Days turned into weeks. She was questioned, reprimanded, lectured. Officers came and went asking her the same things. Why did you go? Why did you stay? Did you give information to the Apache? Each time she answered the same way. I went because my sister couldn't. I stayed because I fell in love. Her honesty only made them angrier. To them it wasn't love, it was betrayal. Word spread among the soldiers. Some looked at her with pity. Others spat near her boots when she passed. They called her the Apache's wife, half in mockery, half in fear. But the cruelty didn't wound her half as much as the silence. Each night she watched the hills turn to blue shadows under the moon, and wondered if he could still feel her heart calling to him. One evening, when a cold autumn wind swept down from the mountains, she heard a knock on her cabin door. When she opened it, a familiar face stood there, Naomi, the missionary's wife who had once worked at the shelter. Clara, she whispered, stepping inside. I heard what happened. Oh, child, you look so pale. Clara tried to smile. It's only the walls that make me sick. I'm not meant to live behind them anymore. Naomi took her hands gently. They say you married him in their way. Is that true? Yes, Clara said softly. Under the moon and the fire, before his people. I am his wife. Naomi sighed deeply, her kind eyes troubled. Then your heart's made a hard road for itself. The army won't let you go back, and if you try, you'll be branded a traitor. Clara's voice trembled. Then let them call me that. What's worse, a traitor or a ghost? Naomi's eyes glistened with tears. She pulled a folded paper from her cloak and pressed it into Clara's hand. This came through a traitor. It's written in Apache symbols. I thought, maybe you'd understand it. Clara's breath caught. Her fingers shook as she unfolded it. She couldn't read every mark, but she recognized his name, Taza, and one phrase repeated 3 times. The wind carries you. Her tears fell onto the paper. Naomi gripped her shoulder. If you love him, pray he lives. But don't go chasing ghosts into the desert. But Clara already knew what she would do. That night, as the fort slept, she hid the note beneath her dress, packed what little she had, and slipped through the shadows toward the gate. The guard was half asleep, and the wind howled loud enough to drown her footsteps. By dawn, she was gone. Back toward the mountains. Back toward him. The desert at dawn was silver and cold. Wind hissed over the mesas, carrying the scent of rain. Clara rode hard, her borrowed horse's hooves thundering across the open land, kicking up clouds of dust that vanished behind her like the past she was leaving behind. She had nothing but a canteen, a blanket, and the note from Taza pressed to her chest. The wind carries you. Those words beat like a drum in her mind, steadying her heart each time fear tried to take hold. For 3 days she rode west, sleeping beneath stars, hiding by day from patrols. She knew the land from her time with the Apache, the river bends, the safe valleys, the secret trails between the red cliffs. But the journey was harder now. Autumn storms were brewing, and each gust of wind bit at her skin like a warning. By the 4th night, clouds gathered thick above her, turning the horizon black. Lightning flared over the peaks, illuminating the twisted shapes of mesquite and cactus. Her horse snorted nervously, stamping its hooves. "It's all right, boy," she whispered, stroking its neck. "We're almost there." But the storm broke suddenly, wild and violent. Rain slashed her face, wind tore at her hair, and thunder rolled so close it shook the ground. The horse reared, terrified, and Clara was thrown. She hit the earth hard, the breath knocked from her chest. For a moment she couldn't move. The horse bolted into the night, and she was left alone under the roaring sky. The rain came down in sheets, soaking her to the bone. She crawled beneath a rock ledge and clutched her blanket around her. Every muscle ached, but she refused to stop. If Taza could cross fire for me, she thought, I can cross a storm for him. She huddled there through the night, whispering to the wind as she had every night since leaving the fort. "Carry me to him," she murmured. "Please." At dawn, the storm passed. The desert steamed, and sunlight broke through the clouds like a promise. She set out again on foot, limping but determined. The trail was long and unforgiving, blisters, hunger, and the weight of exhaustion pulling at her. But she walked until her legs trembled and her lips cracked with thirst. By the 2nd afternoon, she reached a dry arroyo she recognized. Beyond it lay the valley where Taza's people camped in summer. But now it was silent. No fires, no movement, no laughter. Fear coiled tight in her stomach. She found broken arrows near the stream and the charred remains of a fire. Her heart sank. The army must have come. Clara dropped to her knees, pressing her hand to the ashes. They were cold, days old. She searched the ground for any sign, tracks, beads, something familiar, and finally, half buried in the dust, she found it. A small carved pendant shaped like a hawk, Taza's. She clutched it in her fist and sobbed. "Where are you?" A whisper rose behind her, a rustle, faint but real. She turned sharply, reaching for the small knife in her belt. A figure emerged from behind a juniper tree. Tall, lean, wrapped in a dark blanket. "Taza?" The man stepped into the light. His hair was damp from the storm, his eyes the color of wet earth. "Clara," he said softly. For a moment she thought she was dreaming. Then she ran to him, stumbling, falling against his chest. His arms closed around her instantly, strong and trembling. "I thought you were gone," she gasped. "I followed the wind," he murmured, holding her close. "It told me you were coming." She laughed through her tears, clutching his blanket, feeling the warmth of his heart beneath it. "They told me you left the valley." "The soldiers came," he said. "We hid in the canyons. I waited for word, but the word came with the rain." He touched her cheek gently. "You came back." "I had to," she whispered. "I belong here." For a long time they stood there in silence as the desert breathed around them. Two souls who had walked through fire, storm, and judgment to find each other again. But even as she rested her head against his shoulder, Taza's gaze drifted to the horizon. "They will come again," he said quietly. "The soldiers will not rest until the treaty is broken." Clara looked up at him, her resolve hardening. "Then let them come. I won't hide anymore." Taza's hand tightened around hers. "If we are to stand, we must stand as one. Not Apache, not white, just us." And as thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, they began to walk, together, back toward the heart of the mountains where their love had first taken root. The mountains glowed amber under the rising sun as Taza and Clara reached the narrow canyon that guarded his people's hidden camp. The air smelled of sage and damp earth after the storm, and far above an eagle circled lazily. "A sign of protection," Taza murmured. Clara followed him deeper into the canyon until smoke from a small fire appeared ahead. Voices, soft, cautious, echoed off the stone walls. When they stepped into the clearing, the Apache turned to look. At first, there was silence. Then Naiche, Taza's cousin, stood up sharply. "She returned?" he said in disbelief. His gaze flicked between them. "You risk much bringing her here again." "I risk nothing," Taza replied calmly. "The woman I love is not a threat." Naiche's jaw tightened. "You love her, yes. But the soldiers, they will come whether she is here or not, Taza interrupted. His eyes swept across the camp, meeting each face. The treaty is already breaking. The fort sees us as enemies again, but we will not run anymore. Clara stood beside him, her clothes torn and dusty, her hair tangled by wind. Yet there was fire in her eyes, a steadiness that silenced even the doubters. I didn't come to bring harm, she said softly. I came because this is where my heart lives. If they come for me, let them see the truth. Nightja studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. You have courage, white woman. Perhaps too much. That night, as the tribe prepared their defenses, Clara helped the women pack the tents, gather food, and carry water. The air was thick with tension. Children whispered. Men sharpened blades, and horses snorted restlessly. When darkness fell, Clara and Taza sat together near the fire, their hands intertwined. Do you think they'll come? She asked quietly. Taza's gaze lingered on the horizon. Reed is not a man who forgets defiance. He will come. Clara's fingers tightened around his. Then I'll face him. I won't hide behind you. He turned to her, his voice soft but firm. You will not stand behind me. You will stand with me. They sat in silence, the fire painting gold across their faces. For a fleeting moment, it felt like peace. But peace was a fragile dream in the west. At dawn, the sound of hoofbeats broke the stillness. Taza was the first to rise, his hand going to his rifle. They're here, he said quietly. Clara's stomach turned to stone. She could see them now. Lines of soldiers cresting the ridge, sunlight flashing off their rifles. Lieutenant Reed rode at the front, his face grim, determined. Taza motioned for the women and children to take cover in the rocks. Clara stayed beside him. When the soldiers reached shouting distance, Reed raised his hand. Taza, by order of the United States Army, you are to surrender any captives and vacate this territory. Failure to comply will be met with force. Taza's voice carried clear and calm. We have no captives. Only hearts that refuse to be chained. Reed's expression darkened as his gaze fell on Clara. You brought her back here. Do you even understand what you've done? Clara stepped forward, her voice trembling but steady. Yes, I understand perfectly. I came back to my husband. Reed's jaw clenched. You're no wife of his. You're a citizen under law. I was, she cut in sharply. But your law never gave me kindness. His did. A murmur rippled through the Apache ranks, soft, proud. Reed's face turned red with fury. Last warning, he barked. Stand down or we'll open fire. Taza raised his rifle, not in threat but in defiance. If blood must be shed, it will be yours, not hers. Reed gave the signal. Gunfire erupted, sharp, thunderous, echoing through the canyon walls. Horses screamed. Dust and smoke filled the air. Clara ducked behind a boulder, covering her ears as bullets shattered rock beside her. Taza returned fire, shouting commands in Apache. The men fought like shadows, darting between cover, swift and fierce. But the soldiers were many and their weapons stronger. A bullet struck near Taza's shoulder, tearing through his jacket. He stumbled but kept fighting. Taza! Clara screamed, crawling toward him through the smoke. He caught her arm and pulled her behind cover, blood seeping down his arm. Stay down. I won't leave you, she cried. The battle raged for what felt like hours, though it could have been minutes. When at last the gunfire slowed, the air was thick with smoke and silence. The soldiers began to withdraw, retreating under the rising sun. Reed lay wounded, his men dragging him away. His final glare toward Clara was filled with disbelief and hatred. The Apache had held their ground. When the last echo faded, Clara turned to Taza, tears streaking her dust-stained face. You're hurt, she whispered. He smiled faintly, pressing her hand against his heart. Only enough to remember. And as the first light of morning broke over the canyon, painting them both in gold, Clara realized the reckoning was not just for him or her. It was for every heart that dared to love across the lines drawn by men. The smoke of battle had barely cleared when the sun rose fully over the canyon. The air smelled of gunpowder and rain-washed earth. The soldiers were gone, retreating eastward, leaving behind the wounded, the dead, and the silence that follows every storm. Clara knelt beside Taza, her trembling hands pressing a strip of cloth against the wound on his shoulder. Blood seeped through her fingers, but his eyes stayed calm, unflinching. You should rest, she whispered. He shook his head faintly. Not yet. They will return. Soldiers always return, she bit her lip, her voice breaking. Then we'll go. We'll leave this place, find somewhere they can't reach us. Taza's gaze drifted toward the mountains, their peaks glowing gold under the morning light. There is no place beyond reach, Clara, but there are places where the wind runs free. We'll find one. For a long while, neither spoke. The Apache tended their wounded in quiet dignity. The women sang soft songs, songs of mourning but also of survival. And for the first time, Clara sang with them, her voice trembling but true. By nightfall, they buried their dead. Fires flickered low and the stars began to bloom across the dark sky. Taza sat beside Clara, his hand wrapped around hers. I thought love was peace, she said softly. But love is war, isn't it? A war for the right to stay. He looked at her, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. Love is not war, he said. It is what we fight for. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Then we'll fight. For as long as we have to. He smiled faintly. Even the wind tires someday. But I will fight until it stops blowing. They both laughed quietly, the sound fragile but full of life. Over the next weeks, the tribe moved north, deeper into the wildlands. Beyond the trails the soldiers dared to follow. Clara rode beside Taza, learning to navigate by stars, to read the land, to speak the language of wind and silence. She was no longer the trembling bride who'd arrived by mistake. She was part of something older, stronger, a woman remade by love and loss. But word of the skirmish spread quickly. Traders whispered about the white woman who turned Apache. Some said she was captured, others that she bewitched the tribe's warrior chief. None told the truth because none could understand it. To the world, she was a mystery. To Taza, she was home. One morning, months later, Clara stood at the edge of a high cliff overlooking the valley below. The land stretched endlessly, bathed in sunlight. Behind her, the camp stirred. The sound of children's laughter, the crackle of fires, the rhythm of life returning. Taza approached quietly, wrapping his blanket around her shoulders. You still think of the fort, he said gently. She nodded. Sometimes. Of what they said. Of what they'll write about me. He tilted his head, studying her face. What will they write? That I disappeared, she said. That I was lost. He smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Then they are right. The woman you were is gone. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. And the one I am? The one you are, he said softly, was carried by the wind and found where she was meant to be. Clara's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of knowing. She turned toward the horizon where the plains met the sky. The wind rose, warm and wild, lifting her hair. She closed her eyes and listened because she could almost hear it whisper back the words he'd once spoken. The wind carries you. Years later, settlers passing through the region told stories of an Apache camp deep in the northern hills. Peaceful, hidden, led by a tall warrior and a pale-skinned woman with eyes like the morning sky. They said she spoke both tongues, that she healed the sick, taught the children, and sang to the wind as if it were her kin. Some swore she was the ghost of a shelter bride who'd vanished long ago. Others said she was alive, still waiting at the canyon's edge for the world to change enough to accept her love. But the truth was simpler. She was not a ghost. She was the woman the wind carried, the one who defied the walls of men and the laws of nations to find her place beside the man who saw her soul before her face. And when the wind whispered her name through the canyons, the land remembered her, not as a bride bought or given, but as the woman who chose.